First there was a dream. Now there is reality. Here, in the untainted cradle of the heavens, will be created a new super race, a race of perfect physical specimens. You have been selected as its progenitors. Like gods, your offspring will return to Earth and shape it in their image. You have all served in humble capacities in my terrestrial empire. Your seed, like yourselves, will pay deference to the ultimate dynasty which I alone have created. From their first day on Earth, they will be able to look up and know that there is law and order in the heavens.
I don't think so, Jehovah. Happy heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real, my beloved truth seekers. Or as my friend Haymarket likes to say, welcome to the inner sanctum of gnosis and the outer rectum of reality. Today, or more like in this eternal now, we deal with our second installment on the Tarot with our astral guest, Marcus Katz, and his new and meritorious book, Tarosophy. But first, a Japanese radiation of drivel and a much-needed psychic enema. Put your egoic mind in between your legs and get ready to break out of your celluloid jam, Brad and Janet.
The life you know, all the stuff that you take for granted, it's not gonna last.
After all, the Gnostic revolution has only begun. The battle against wickedness in high places hasn't even reached the "you sunk my battle shit" stages yet.
Guess what, guys? It's time to embrace the horror.
And this quote from the Nag Hammadi Libraries, the second treatise of the great Seth, puts it all into infernal perspective. After we went forth from our home and came down to this world and came into being in the world in bodies, we were hated and persecuted, not only by those who are ignorant, but also by those who think that they are advancing the name of Christ, since they were unknowingly empty, not knowing who they are, like dumb animals. They persecuted those who have been liberated by me, since they hate them, those who, should they shut their mouth, would weep with a profitless groaning, because they did not fully know me. Instead, they serve two masters, even a multitude. But you will become victorious in everything, in war and battles, jealous, division, and wrath. But in the uprightness of our love, we are innocent, pure, and good, since we have the mind of the Father in an ineffable mystery.
We are not of one mind, but we now speak with one voice.
And that's what we're all about. Unless you do not have the Leonidas cojones to break on through to the other side and away from the Kenoma, or emptiness in Greek, that vast wasteland of Home Depot mirages and soft spiritual porn from Doris Day ideologies and religions. If you want to play it safe with granola theosophy, give cunnilingus to Gaia and her organic concentration camp clitoris, or bow down to the meccas of literalist safety, you might as well turn off the show right now. Go instead and sign useless web petitions, shake your fist at chemtrails in the sky, or share nice quotes by Rumi on your Facebook wall that you don't even own.
It's all true. It's all real. Nothing here is fake. Nothing you see on this show is fake. It's merely controlled.
But if you want to fight the good fight, keep the faith, and finish the race of your many lifetimes, if you want to follow your bliss, live for your bliss, and ultimately die for your bliss, then welcome with kindness and love to Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the God above God that can.
You are not in Kansas anymore. If there is a hell, you might want to go there for some R&R.
Let the Gnostic callers and New Age Liberaces take care of negotiating with Jehovah and his union thug angels for turfs on the favelas of creation. We are the warrior case of Akamoth and the imminent legions of Elileth, the Parsifals of Noria and Zoe. Our weapons are Athena art and creativity, Mercury satire and parody, Ares machine gun truths, and killer drone reason.
Anonymity is your name. Silence your native tongue. You are no longer part of the system. You are above the system, over it, beyond it.
Raging against the machine is so 20th century, so we're raging against heaven itself for our misplaced childhoods and paradises lost. And why? Because we are the Gnostics, the lovers of the Esoterica, and the Dionysian freethinkers. We are the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set the controls to the heart of the sun, the indomitable race of Seth, as the classic Gnostics were called. And it is important to know that the name Seth comes from the Hebrew for foundation. We are the true foundation of truth and virtue. We are also the revenge of the myth upon its conquerors, quoting the great mystic scholar Gershom Scholem. We are the lords of deconstruction and the word made unflesh.
You've changed things. Forever. There's no going back.
And it was Harold Bloom who said one of the central mottos of the Gnostics was, quote, everything that can be broken should be broken. And he didn't mean it literally for you spiritual materialists and those of Irish descent. No, he meant tear down the wall along with pink. He meant atomize the ersatz realities of the gods and their penchant for creating forgeries from the idealized realms of the Aeons.
System's got more bugs than a bait store.
An Aeon Byte Gnostic radio is your boot camp and boot up your arse where you can train to become a true seeker warrior, a hero of 1,000 faces, and a fireproof Giordano Bruno who, like Jesus in the Gospel of Tommy, said he had come to bring fire to the world. And sometimes we are the fire itself, the astral flame of the alchemist, burning away the fugacious substances of mediocrity, complacency, and Borg thought.
Do you want to take a leap of faith? Or become an old man, filled with regret, waiting to die alone?
The choice is yours, but at Aeon Byte, we do not take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. We are not here to make a better world, but to help you create better inner worlds, because the outer world is ultimately lost, although there is nothing wrong with being ethereal Don Quixotes, in my humble opinion. As Upton Sinclair said in The Jungle, there is no wilderness where I can hide from these things. There is no haven where I can escape them. Though I travel to the ends of the earth, I find the same accursed system. I find that all the fair and noble impulses of humanity, the dreams of poets and the agonies of martyrs, are shackled and bound in the service of organized and predatory greed.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
And going back to the theme of fire, Beavis, also known as the devil's only friend, as Don McLean sang, it was Martin Luther who said, "We are all under the same roof, but the house is on fire." And we don't need no water of unconsciousness, so let the mother fracker burn. Burn, mother fracker, burn. And I'm just betraying my age by just saying this. Although the counter to Luther and Jesus might be the Buddhist saying that goes, the barn has burned, but now we can see the moon.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
We at the Virtual Alexandria are here to help you become more than you've allowed yourself to be for a long time. You, an avatar of the eternal, ages after you were cast in monkey suits made of space dust that is about 14 billion years old.
Henry, why don't you wake up? Darwin was wrong. Man's still an ape.
We are here to help you cultivate gnosis, that knowing of the unknown, and salvific data from Valis and Sophia. That which is not the result, but brings results, as my friend Jeremy Puma once said. And most of all, we are here to help you write your own gospel and live your own myth, as the ancient Gnostics were wont to do and were punished for by the forces of the Demogorgon, Voltaire's name for the demiurge.
Most people confuse evil with their own trivial lusts and perversions. Now, true evil is as pure as innocence.
I am Abraxas, the herald of fierce dawns of higher awareness, who has stolen the chariot of the pretty boy, by the ruled jock, serpent killer Apollo, and now rides the sun into hell and scorches away the zodiacs that rob you of your free agency.
My free will. I never leave home without it.
Free will? It is a bitch.
I am the destroyer of limits, because limit is what the God of this world has placed on everything, including your potential and dreams. I am the limitless, and so are you, all of us, expanding in a reversing zoom to the boundless, the timeless, until we join the imagination of Bar Below and the invisible spigot. I am a dream of you, that ship smoke on the horizon. I am you, and I manifest as Miguel Connor, talking out of his Pandora's R's from the lawful and frigid dystopia of Chicago, a voice in the wilderness crying out for your indwelling Christ and inner Hermes Trismegistos.
I can't decide if you're a genius or a lunatic.
Don't they sort of go hand in hand?
I am the oracle of 1,000 dooms for your lower self that sold out to the sanity and numbers fallacy and credit rating pagodas. And lastly, before my resume runs out of space and the men in white come to take me away, ha ha hee hee, I am your Proteus, changing shapes to different teachers, while midwifing the mysteries from the wombs of your divinity that will work for you and only you.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole.
And then you can take your place in the battlefield of the true seeker warrior and brace yourself as your doppelganger friends and family, your bosses and co-workers, and even your own government, under the control of the powers and principalities, send out their rovers from the prisoner that will attempt to choke you back into forgetfulness and ignorance if you are not prepared.
Those things outside are just vessels. They're possessed. The weakest willed are the easiest to turn.
Possessed by what? Demons?
No. By angels.
But you will never be alone, because there is divine and meta-divine assistance on the way, and I'll stand by you like Krishna stood by Arjuna.
It's an honor to die at your side. It's an honor to live at yours.
and one of the weapons in the battlefield of the true seeker warrior that has worked so well for centuries is, as I mentioned at the beginning, before you said to yourself, "This is a bad day to quit sniffing glue," is the tarot. It is a widely known arcane craft, practiced from the wicked streets of New Orleans by hedge magicians, all the way to C.G. Jung, who consulted it every night before bed. And our astral guest on this Saturday, April 30th, the year of our demiurge 2011, has just released a book that is the alpha and omega on the tarot, entitled Tarosophy.
Okay, let's play some goddamn cards!
This is the gracious and cultivated Marcus Katz, who has also authored such works as The Zodiacal Rules, Tarot Flip, Alchemy Course, and After the Angel. For more information on Marcus and his Tarot Worldwide Guild, a must if you are into this divinatory archetypal form of magic, please visit tarotprofessionals.com. That is tarotprofessionals.com. Any way you want to say it. It's a site knocked up with blogs, forums, courses, linkies, videos, and articles on everything tarot or tarot.
Witness the wonders of an ancient glory.
And what a capital work is Tarosophy, my beloved true seekers. I must admit that the archon of complacency has won the day with me learning the tarot, mainly because I always had a friend or family member around proficient at it who took care of my demonic needs. But Tarosophy is a true Rosetta Stone and Google in a book when it comes to this occult practice. Whether you're a newbie or have been practicing longer than the ending to Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer.
Oh God, I thought that was absolutely dreadful.
As our interview will detail, Marcus reveals that even today there are many misconceptions about the tarot beyond the polemics of fundamentalists, even among its adepts and devotees. Some of them border on the Donald Trump deliciously absurd. We will take a comprehensive gander into the tarot as detailed in Marcus's new book, dealing with it from every possible perspective: historical, mystical, occult, psychological, professional, and even financial. And Marcus offers amazing spiritual exercises you can use with the tarot, regardless of your experience. No card is left unturned in his book and this episode, my beloved true seekers.
Another day, another defilement.
Hecate, beyond the mystic insights of Tarosophy, Marcus even does a scientific and statistical excursion, finding out all about the demographics of tarot users in a way that would make the smartphones you're using that steal your personal information jealous. Marcus even offers Midas advice on how to approach the tarot if you want to make a living at it. I don't see this as a problem, because we hobbits in the Esoterica need some elven breadcrumbs on our way to throwing the rings of Orwellian oppression into the Mount Dooms of orthodoxy.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
I've read a few tarot books myself, and this one is by far the best, without a Thomas doubt. Of course, the work of Lon Milo Duquette should be mentioned, and I should mention that you should download Aeon Byte number 49, where Lon gives his views on the tarot. But along with tarot, all episodes of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio are an Excalibur in the battlefields of the true seeker warrior, this burning house called our lives, while the armies of Hades prepare to destroy your uniqueness and take your divine spark deeper into the black iron prison of Philip K. Dick or the artifact of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Attention program. You will receive an identity disc. Everything you do or learn will be imprinted on this disc. If you lose your disc or fail to follow commands, you will be subject to immediate de-resolution.
Our store has over 200 shows that is a complete armory that houses your own personal Stormbringer or Durandal. It's the greatest audio resource on the internets on Gnosticism, the Esoterica, comparative religion, the occult and free thought, and it's personally endorsed by Simon Megas and Robert Loggia.
That's Robert Loggia. R as in Robert Loggia. O as in oh my God, it's Robert Loggia. B as in by God, that's Robert Loggia.
And remember, what keeps this holy blasphemy called Aeon Byte Gnostic radio going is your support. We are but one of many independent webcasters not beholding to monolithic ideology, corporate sponsors, or media caliphates. The internet is only as good as its content, and there are those who are working very hard to make it into a collective entity like the monster from John Carpenter's The Thing. If we independent podcasters evanesce, then truth will be murdered with hemlock disinformation, and we all once again will be frogs in boiling water.
Denial is the most predictable of all human responses.
This venture is completely non-profit. All money is invested back in the show and to hopefully buy myself the complete DVD series of Blossom.
Are you trying to develop a sense of humor, or am I going deaf?
Thank you so much for those who support Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio every week, and those who have purchased Voices of Gnosticism, the critically acclaimed and successful book that opens 1,000,000 doorways into the sapience of the ancient Gnostics and the other religions surrounding it in those strange Greco-Roman times.
Marcus Aurelius had a dream that was Rome, Proximo. This is not it! This is not it!
And thank you for welcoming Stargazer, my rebooted science fiction epic, once known as the Queen of Darkness, that is as Dickian as Inception, except with a dark, majestic, apocalyptic world of thirsty gods, heroic beings that make Blade look like Tintin of the comic books, and contains Sophia themes in abundance. Many critics have said it is the most unique vampire story and greatest cyberpunk opera to come out in a long time.
We should be ruling the humans, not running around making back alley treaties with them. For fuck's sake, these people are our food.
And it's only $3.99 on Kindle, as I've broken away from my corrupt and literally satanic publisher and now can hunt for prey on my own. You can find out more information at StargazerVampireNovel.com, including where to download the first 4 chapters at no cost. So check it out and check out a mundane reality for a spell or two, and into a stark reality of black wonder, and then find out they are one and the same.
Are you saying this is the apocalypse? I'm saying this is an extermination.
Don't wait, because time is short, as the Ancient of Days squeezes his meaty fist around society and slowly breaks the collective sanity and independence of the human race. The proof is in the pudding, and Aeon Byte has more than proved it now that you've eaten your meat and can have your gnosis pudding. Time is running short for the revolution in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria.
Every revolution begins with one small act of courage. But I hope you know how serious this is. I hope you understand that this will have consequences.
Before I end my drivel and we go with the jaw-dropping interview with Marcus Katz, let me leave you with this quote from Martin Luther King. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men does not remain at flood. It ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is adamant to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late.
What happened to us? What happened to the American dream? It came true! You're looking at it.
Is it too late, my beloved true seekers? Is the war lost? I think not. Let us go for another round of war in the battlefield of the true seeker warrior. Let us show them a world without sin. This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we have the pleasure of being joined today by Marcus Katz to discuss his new book, Tarosophy, Tarot to Engage Life, Not Escape It. How are you doing today, Marcus?
I'm doing fine, Miguel. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Could you tell us how you became interested in the tarot and what it has done for your life?
Certainly. I first encountered tarot when I was 13. We actually had a very progressive school that I went to, and in our religious education lesson we had a teacher come along and introduce New Age concepts to us. So we actually had an afternoon lesson, I remember very well, of dowsing, and they brought in a speaker who talked to us about astrology, the New Age, and tarot. And we went out into the field, the playing field behind the school, and we made some dowsing rods out of old pens and metal coat hangers. Walked across the field, and 3 friends and myself found a line across this field where the dowsing rods crossed. So we went back to our teacher and said, there's something really happening here. RE teacher said, well, how do you test this? And so we thought to go to the janitor. We went to the janitor. He called out brought out all of the floor plans and ground plans for the school. And we had discovered the water pipe that ran across to the swimming pool from the tennis courts. And I was absolutely shocked. It was my first encounter of what Kierkegaard calls the invisible knots that bind the world. I went home and I got a pass, a special pass to go to the adult library. And I rushed upstairs to the adult section of the library and got a book on tarot, which had also been taught to us in this lesson. I photocopied 1 page of it. It was the Stuart Kaplan book. Was about the only book they had. Made my own set of tarot cards, took them to school the following day, and started reading tarot cards for people, just with 22 of the major arcana sellotaped, fastened to bits of cardboard. And I started reading tarot then, so I was 13. And I think I've read maybe 10 to 12,000 face-to-face readings since that time, over 30 years. To me, it's a divine encounter. When one is reading tarot, you enter into a dialogue, and that dialogue is a square, really. It's the dialogue between oneself and the cards. It's a dialogue between oneself and the client or the person you're reading for. It's also a dialogue between the client and the cards. the client also has a dialogue with you. And also there's a divine encounter as well, where that square is complete with another dialogue that goes on in the encounter itself. And that's something that can't be replicated. It happens in the divinatory moment, and that's the thing that a tarot reader really lives for.
And are we talking about also drawing upon your higher self? Or I know you are aware of Anthony Peake's work, The Daemon. Does that play into it, or is this something a newbie tarot reader shouldn't worry about?
It's certainly something a newbie tarot reader shouldn't worry about. I think the interesting thing about Anthony Peake's work is that I encountered it just after I'd finished a magical operation called the Abramelin working, which is a 6-month intense retreat operation designed to bring the practitioner to what is called the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Now, I'm releasing a self-published book of that very shortly, called After the Angel. Lon-Milo Duquette kindly took a brilliant photograph for me of a angelic statue, which is going to grace the cover of the book. That was about 6 years ago, and I came across Anthony Peake's work recently and was fascinated that it ties in with my view on tarot as well. I don't like the conflation of the ideas of Holy Guardian Angel, Higher Self, Oquades, all of the other sort of concepts that seem to constellate around the idea that there is something more than ourselves. However, certainly in the Daemon book, I think, to me, the interesting thing is that in tarot, we learn what I call predictive hindsight. And this is something I give some exercises for newbie tarot readers to develop in the book, in Tarosophy. Predictive hindsight is, imagine that you did a reading for a year, where every month for the year ahead, you have 3 or 4 tarot cards to describe the nature and the quality of that month. And then the most important thing, and this is why it's good to keep a journal, is to look at what you predict for the entire year in advance and make a note of that, or be conscious and aware of that. And then at the end of the first month, you look back at how the month has developed, you look at the cards, and you, to some extent, might reinterpret them, okay, in the light of your experience. But then you turn around mentally down that timeline and you look at all of the other cards and see if you reinterpret those as well. And you repeat this every month in a stepped progress over the entire year. And what a newbie beginner finds with that technique is that as you start to look at the cards, they morph in front of you, so that you end up saying not the first thing that comes into your mind, but the thing you pre-remember yourself that you would have said when you look back on the cards in the light of your experience. So it becomes a predictive hindsight. This is something that Anthony Peake covers in his book very well. The fact that it's more of a process of amnesis, a remembering of the self, or a recalling of the future, rather than looking ahead into it. So I like the idea that we teach people through tarot to contact that present moment of which we are lagging behind. And I think that when I interviewed a lot of tarot readers for Tarosophy, for the book, and asked them about how their sense of time had changed, every reader who is experienced has achieved significant changes in their perception of time. And obviously that underpins our sense of self-identity and awareness. So I think that's something very important within tarot itself.
So basically, Marcus, when we're talking about divination and prediction in the tarot, or in our role in the tarot, it's basically changing our awareness of the universe.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the main differences of Tarosophy from any previous tarot book is that I teach it in a initiatory manner. We have a brand new concept. I try to fit as many brand new concepts on every page of the book than are in some entire books on the same subject. And one of them is what we call gated spreads. A gated spread is a sequence of spreads that's retro-engineered so that the final spread will only make sense if you have plugged in real-life experience building up to that spread. So we then gate the spreads so that you do a tarot reading on day one, for example, if it's a 7-day gated spread, and then the spread requests you to do some form of action, to change something physically in your life. The next spread takes that as input into the spread, takes the activity that you have changed during the day, and you plug that into the next spread, and so forth. So it provides a series of gates of action that initiate significant changes in your life. And that engagement with life is something that we're very keen to promote with Tarosophy and the other tarot books that we're writing.
Could you give us a brief history of the tarot and maybe dispel many of the misconceptions of it? I'm sure it's not from ancient Egypt, is it?
Oh, I'm afraid it is. No. But now you must die for revealing it.
Yeah, exactly. The mummy's gonna get me.
Yeah. I gave a talk at the Golden Dawn 120th anniversary conference in London a couple of years ago. I was talking about some of the early initiatory schema that the Golden Dawn had drawn upon via the Freemason Mackenzie, that dated back over a century before the Golden Dawn. And although this is reasonably well known to scholars and academics, it's only published in German, and I was revealing it to a whole group of people who wouldn't have had access to that material. And I thought it was pretty impressive, but afterwards someone came up to me and said, you know, the 22 tarot cards are engraved into 22 doors on the outside of the pyramids. And I said, well, which pyramid? Because I've been to Egypt twice, and I've looked around the pyramids, and I can assure you there aren't 22 doors into any of the pyramids at Giza. He looked really shocked, as if I was somehow, violently arguing with him or disagreeing in some way or another. But I was just genuinely curious how he'd learned this particular fact. In Emily Auger, the scholar Emily Auger has produced an incredible anthology which will be out very soon through the Association of Tarot Studies in Australia, called Tarot in Culture. And I have a paper in there which deals with illegitimate knowledge in tarot, which is to say we learn things about tarot, and it's a species of what's called illegitimate knowledge. We don't know how we've learned it. Someone on one of my courses asked me about tarot and said that their first encounter had been in a James Bond film. Live and Let Die. Yes, yeah. I certainly remember Jane Seymour in that film. I'm not sure I remember much about the tarot cards. However, she'd learnt about tarot in that film. And the following day on the course, we were discussing at lunch how tarot was associated with other things. And this woman out of the blue across the table said, well, of course, tarot's used in voodoo, isn't it? I stopped her and stopped the entire conversation and said, can I ask you, how do you know that? Where did you learn that? And she couldn't tell me. She said, I must have read it in a book or maybe seen it somewhere or someone told me. And I said after a while, did you not learn it from the James Bond film? And she said, oh, of course, yes. And it's incredible what people learn about tarot without knowing that they've learned it. And its association with Egypt, its association with gypsies, its association with ancient mystery schools are all forms of illegitimate knowledge. We know for a fact that tarot arose in northern Italy in the early 15th century. 1420 to 1440, around that time we have examples of references to what we would now call tarot cards. It wasn't until about 1530 that they became known as tarocchi, so they were always called by an Italian name because that's where they developed. Originally they'd been called the Carte da Trionfi, and they were part of a trick or trump-taking game where each virtue would trump the preceding virtue. So it would be a game of triumphs. And that's where we get the order of the major arcana, so that each of the major arcana, in effect, is from a trick-taking game where one of them would beat the others in a hand in a card game. We know those to be factual. There is no real solid evidence of any earlier form of tarot, as we would call it. Its association with esotericism is a little bit of a later conflation into tarot, although it is, to me, is a very important one. And I would argue a reasonable one, but not necessarily on historical grounds. And that's really what we know. I have a Twitter feed where I give out the top 10 tarot sillies. These include things like, you cannot buy a deck for yourself. You have to be gifted a deck. You must keep your deck in a silk bag or it will lose its energies. That's one that's usually told by sellers of silk bags, to be honest.
Of course.
What else? You mustn't let anyone touch your tarot cards. Now, to me, that's actually makes sense in that most people tend to drop them or spill things on them. So just for health and safety, it's not a good idea. I'm not quite sure about the psychic nature of that. But all of these things, when we look at it with common sense and a little bit of historical rigor, it does wipe away what has basically been a marketing ploy to associate tarot with ancient Egypt and the gypsies.
But Marcus, you do write in your book that before you get, or as soon as you get your tarot card or whatever, which one you choose, you should do a sort of charging, banishing spell, right?
I provide that in the book with a lot of other ideas for people who are going to want to do those sorts of things. I believe that a tarot reading is a form of sacred event, and in order to promote that divinatory moment, I do find ritual of any description to be quite useful. However, that's not to say that flinging a few cards across a table in a bar is not an equally valid way of engaging with that divine moment. In effect, all moments are divine, so one doesn't necessarily need ritual to access them.
I've certainly had some good tarot readings at bars. It's a great place. A great place for everything, right?
It is, definitely. Tarot should be a face-to-face, social, engaged, living event as part of contemporary society. I'm way away from the gypsy associations of tarot, and there are a lot of people who are now working to promote a very positive form of tarot. For example, Donna Leigh de la Rose on Beyond Worlds radio show, which we feature in Tarot Town, She has a very engaging, fresh take. Teresa Reid, Storm Sestavani, all of the people we've been lucky to be engaged with. These people are bringing tarot kicking and screaming into contemporary society, and long may that continue.
And Marcus, there's also this concept that all that our regular deck of cards that people use for playing derives from the tarot, and that all card games derive from some concept of the tarot. Is there any truth to this?
It's the other way around. For example, the association of gypsies with tarot, there's no pictorial or verbal record of that association. Gypsies may have used, and we have images of them using playing cards for gambling and perhaps reading palms, but there's no evidence that they ever used tarot cards. It's quite interesting. Sometimes you get marketing images where you have some gypsies using a deck of tarot cards that wasn't even invented until about 1910. So there's always been that sort of association, but it's not really necessary at all.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people like to make this joke that you have Christian fundamentalists and others saying, the tarot is evil, but a regular deck of cards comes from the tarot, so therefore you are practicing supernatural powers by default.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the early history we have of tarot that can be relied upon is often Christian diatribes against using cards, but for gambling.
Right.
Again, the evidence that we have of its use as divination doesn't come until quite late on in its history. The church were far more interested in persecuting dice and cards for gambling, and there's no real evidence of them persecuting its divinatory practice until relatively contemporary times.
And the most popular spread that we know of is probably the Celtic Cross. In your book, Tarosophy, you give a fascinating chapter on it with some very interesting insights. Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the Celtic Cross because it's a spread that I use, and if you go onto some of the more popularist websites, you'll see that it's described as a spread that's been used for centuries, or it's the most popular spread, and it was used by the ancient Celts. It's called the Ancient Celtic Cross, and I knew for sure that the Celts didn't use tarot cards at all, so their necessity for having a spread for them, I was somewhat confused about.
It didn't help them against Julius Caesar. We know that.
No. They would have seen that coming a lot more clearly if they had been using a Celtic Cross. They would have seen the Chariot card in the future. However, having said that, I was fascinated by its history, and Mary Kay Greer had already done some work on its history. I was in the Golden Dawn archives in London, and I was reading through some papers, and I came across a brief note in the York collection in the Warburg Institute in London, where a lot of the Golden Dawn material is stored. It's very badly indexed. I've come across work by Dion Fortune, handwritten or typed letters that's entirely uncategorized, mislabeled, and very revealing, and yet isn't even covered by her own biographers, just purely because of the amount of time they've had to research it. But with the Golden Dawn, the history of the Celtic Cross is fascinating because it isn't Celtic, it's not a cross, and it's not ancient. So why is it called the Ancient Celtic Cross or the Celtic Cross? And even in its first publication, which was in Waite's Pictorial Key to the Tarot, as it was first published the year prior to that title, The Key to the Tarot, which accompanied the deck in 1910 that Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith designed, it's mentioned in there as just another method of divination. That's it. There's no Celtic, there's no ancient, there's no cross. And yet in the Pictorial Key, it comes out as the Celtic Cross. And then later, it becomes the ancient Celtic Cross, as if people were thinking, oh, we can run with this idea. I found a typescript manuscript in the Golden Dawn archives called A Gypsy Method of Divination. And I was reading through these 2 or 3 sheets of paper by F.L. Gardner, an initiate of the Golden Dawn Order. And down at the bottom, lo and behold, there was the Celtic Cross, as it's now known. And it wasn't drawn in quite the same way. The so-called stave was to the left and not to the right. And the instructions for using it were somewhat different, but you could see where Waite had taken it from. And so, we know for a fact that the Celtic Cross, as it's now called, was used within the Golden Dawn. So no later than 1910, when it was first published, no earlier than 1888, when the Golden Dawn was first formed. Sometime during that time, the Celtic Cross was developed as an outer order method for general use to avoid Golden Dawn members having to use the opening of the key method, which takes hours and hours and hours to do. And you have to learn lots of correspondences in order to do it properly. So sometime during that period between 1888 and 1910, someone in the Golden Dawn developed this quick reading for the outer order so it could be used generally for people, and it was originally called A Gypsy Method of Divination. Waite published it, and he called it Another Method of Divination, and then for reasons that can be surmised but certainly aren't known, it became an Celtic Cross, because there was a lot of Celtic revivalism going on at the time, and particularly there might have been involvement with Yeats. So it just seemed a good name to call it. And I cover some ground as to why I think it might have been Yeats that actually assisted Waite call it the Celtic Cross.
Yeah, it has to do a lot with his grave, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I was sort of researching into it because I wanted to know a bit more about Waite and Yeats in particular, and I found Drumcliff Cross, which is a broken cross where Yeats wanted to be buried, and I think he is indeed buried in the graveyard which this cross is, and he wrote a poem about it as well. So I'm pretty sure that's a good grounds for saying that he might have looked at this spread that had been designed by someone within the order and said, we could call that a Celtic Cross spread because it looks like a broken Celtic cross.
Your book also gives quite a few exercises for both the starting, the novice tarot reader, as well as the intermediary and the advanced practitioner. So you do give a lot for everybody in your book, which is something I liked. I even found things that I found interesting for myself. But one of the most fascinating exercises in your book is called Living the Archetypes. Could you tell us about this one?
Sure. For me, the major arcana can't really be pinned down because, and this is the problem about teaching them, with a lot of the other cards, there are different problems with teaching each of them. For example, with the minor cards, our main problem is that the symbols are multivalent. Even Crowley pointed this out, and he said it was the mark of an initiate to be able to understand the multivalency of the cards. That's to say, if we look at a card like the Two of Swords, where we see on the Waite Smith deck, a woman blindfolded holding two swords in a sort of cross configuration with the tide behind her. When we read that in a reading, the blindfold, in one reading, it could symbolize guilt. In another reading, we might read that as ignorance. In another reading, not facing up to your responsibilities. The blindfold itself, depending on the context of the question, the moment, the intuitive or the inspirational skill of the reader, and the cards around it, that blindfold is multivalent. So you cannot teach a card by keywords or by an analysis of the symbols or learning the symbols by rote. These are all very good starting points, but they're not the essential nature of how a good tarot reader actually reads the cards. With the court cards, we have a problem that the people on the court cards are people. And people are, by their very nature, multivalent. We have all aspects of the represented, the universe around us. So we can draw on all of these parts of ourselves. So when we look at a court card like the King of Swords, we wonder if he might be a bit more Queen of Cups on his days off, or when he's drunk, or something like that. So people have difficulties forcing the King of Swords to be just one sort of quality or person or set of keywords or so on, whilst they're looking at a human being on the card, because we know that we're not as simple as that. Now, with the major cards, our problem is that in order to teach them, they are archetypal. Or they are symbols of archetypes, to be a little bit more Jungian precise. With each of the major cards, we really have to experience them. And the method that I teach, which I've seen sort of cut down methods since I started to teach this, but this is the more considered method in my view, is that what you do is you take a card, starting with the Magician card, and you put it somewhere where you can see it. And this method was taught to me by a Tasmanian Kabbalist who followed the Gurdjieff system and just happened to do,
that's eclectic.
and just happened to do tarot as well. And he was one of my primary teachers to begin with. What you do is you take the Magician card and you have it somewhere where you can see it, and you wait for the archetype of the card to manifest in some way in your life. And because, by definition, the archetypes are creating the represented world about us, as a result, when we point ourselves towards an archetype in our own awareness, in effect, it creates that event. It draws that event, depending on how you model it. But what happens is, within a few days, quite often with the Magician card, you have some event that is truly magical. It could be a massive synchronicity that you notice. In my case, I got mugged going home for the first and only time in my life. And I knew this was an event out of the ordinary, and it was the same evening I turned over the card. And I tried to make sense of why the Magician card would have, caused me to be attacked by 3 people outside a police station, strangely enough.
Oh, dear.
And the following day I realized, of course, that Mercury is not just the god of merchants, who is corresponds to that tarot card, but he's also the god of thieves. And ever since that time, which is a good 20 years ago now, I cannot look at that card without wondering what is really going on, what the trickery is that's afoot. The card is mercurial, slippery. It is thieving. The Magician is swapping the cups around, but the P is not under any of them anymore. But that's a real, physical, living experience when I read the cards, and I bring that into my interpretation of that card itself. And when you've had the experience of the Magician, hopefully not as threatening as mine was, you then go on to the second card. And the interesting thing is this exercise takes about 18 months to do, because even though there's only 22 cards, some of them may take weeks before they actually manifest. And it's not just the content of their manifestation that teaches you about the card, it's the nature in which it manifests. And that cannot be taught, it can only be experienced. And it becomes an initiation into the card itself. For example, the Magician card is often quite quick, and that's quite good because when you start off with the exercise, you realize that there's something happening. But that's what the Magician is there to do, is to tell you that there is magic in the world. The High Priestess is then a far more ephemeral experience. And it's almost as if people wait for the same type of experience as the Magician card, but they don't get it. But meanwhile, they change subtly. They start to realize different things. Maybe the universe isn't magical. Maybe it is. Who knows? And that is the very nature of the High Priestess card. So it goes through the entire sequence. And you only ever need to do it once in your life, but you will never ever forget it. And you will always bring that living archetypal connection into your readings. So that's one of the... I actually give that as one of the beginner exercises. And there are at least 50, if not more, exercises throughout the book for all levels of ability.
Marcus, what would you say are the best qualities to have a strong foundation as a tarot reader?
Well, I think for me it's authenticity. I list in the book 5 qualities of the best tarot readers that I've modeled. I've used NLP over the last 20 years to model the unconscious processes of tarot readers. In the 80s, I sat in front of maybe hundreds of tarot readers, one after another, over months and months and months, watching what they were unconsciously doing using NLP, which we can perhaps talk about, to model their unconscious processes so I could teach it other people and learn it myself. And one of the things is authenticity. If a tarot reader is true to themselves and just reads the cards, no matter what their experience, no matter what their approach to tarot, and no matter what the question, if they are truly authentic and congruent to their experience of looking at the cards, I think that that sets a good foundation to be a tarot reader. People trying to pretend, people trying to impress people trying to use the tarot cards as some sort of crutch to give homespun advice that no one would listen to unless they were on the other side of a tarot table. That doesn't work for me. And I drum that out to my students as fast as possible. I think as well a sense of curiosity. I think that's one of the ones I list in the book. A good tarot reading for me and for people I talk to is one where the tarot reader is curious, is engaged in the reading to find out what is going on with you, rather than somehow telling you in some way or another. That there's both that congruency and the curiosity, both of those open a dialogue. And as I mentioned before, that divine dialogue that takes place during the reading itself is essential for a powerful reading. My mantra is, well, I have 2. I have a number, but one is just read the cards. You know, not the other person, not yourself, not your expectations, but just read the cards. And the other is, if it doesn't change the person dramatically, it's a wasted opportunity.
And we might as well, since you brought it up, talk about NLP. What is NLP?
Okay, it's abbreviated for neuro-linguistic programming. However, it's, if we look at the early work of Braid, who developed hypnotism and who coined the phrase hypnotism, he originally called it, and I don't think many people know this, but neurohypnotism. And being a dour Scot, he said, for brevity, let's just call it hypnotism. He was replacing mesmerism with the nervous sleep, hypnotism. But he originally called it neurohypnotism. And I think the developers of NLP didn't want to call it hypnotism, so they called it neuro, putting Braid's original back in. And then instead of hypnotism, they thought, well, that's just a form of, what would we call it nowadays? Well, sort of linguistic programming. You like programming people's brains with language. So neuro-linguistic programming. That sounds pretty catchy. Even though then, I love having the conversations where people say, what's NLP? I say it's a form of how you represent the world, looking at that, working with that in order to gain clarity in your communication. And they say, and what does NLP stand for? And I say, neuro-linguistic programming. And they say, what does that mean? And I say, I don't really know. But nonetheless, it is a form of modeling and accessing our representation of the world inside our own heads and making changes to that representation. So I use it in my therapeutic work with clients for things like stress, phobias. I do a lot of work with phobias, eating disorders, weight loss, smoking cessation, gambling. I have a lot of success with gambling clients, strangely enough, even though I work with cards in a very different sort of way. So NLP is a system that can be used within other forms of therapy, other forms of teaching, other forms of communication, but doesn't really have a consistent or coherent model in itself.
Marcus, and what is some of the advice you would give to a tarot reader in order to make a living from it, if that's what they choose to do?
Yeah, well, certainly in terms of professionalism, we run a organization called Tarot Professionals, and the website is tarotprofessionals.com, and we have, in effect, a trade magazine that has now been, it's on its 10th issue. We've been running that for 2 years. We also offer sort of legal advice. We can't offer legal advice because we're not lawyers, but we do offer legal guidance and information to tarot readers. We also offer marketing advice and so forth. So my first, obviously biased advice would be to join Tarot Professionals and get a considered professional background into tarot. My next advice would be to market to your audience in a state of normalcy. That is to say, normalize what you're doing. I worked in IT for a long time, traveled the world, working on IT systems globally. And I had a tarot deck with me, and I would read tarot cards for people, and I never took them into a board meeting because I used other tools. I used other tools instead. But most of a 10-year period, if I was doing a tarot reading, I would usually be in a suit and tie whilst I was doing it. And I think that's important, to just be absolutely open with what you're doing. There's nothing embarrassing about it. It's not evil, even though half your market might think it is. But if you somehow respond to that, it's almost like a lot of tarot readers, in my experience, not a lot, but some of them seem to have this persecution complex set up already. And in 30 years, I've never had any problem with anyone, ever, not once, with tarot. I've talked to Christians about it. In fact, there's an interesting Christian tarot in the V&A Museum that some of my Christian friends were very interested to see. The media, we seem to have no problems with, as long as we play ball with them to some extent. That would be my second piece of advice. So first piece of advice, join Tarot Professionals. Second piece of advice is to, when you market, just treat it as a divinatory art for contemporary society that you are a practitioner of. And my third piece of advice is far more practical, is give your card to hairdressers.
Hairdressers?
Hairdressers. because one of the facts, and I've got a lot of surveys in Tarosophy. I did my own, and I also surveyed all of the existing surveys, although they were not totally professional. And one of the interesting things about the tarot market, as an audience, as a community, as a population, is that it is the majority are female, 88%, and the majority of that majority are aged, on average, the average age is 44, but the bell curve, the majority are slightly over that. So when you look at photos of tarot conferences, including our own, you will see that demographic played out. We're very keen, actually, at the moment to attract into tarot a lot of younger readers, because the age shift in tarot is somewhat skewed, in my opinion, for a broad audience that could develop tarot, take it in entirely new ways. Most of those people, when they want a tarot reading, it's during times of change in their life. Weddings, funerals, important events, dates, and so forth. And most of that audience is likely to go, guess where? A hairdresser. And I've given that piece of advice to a lot of people, and they have reported back bookings, solid bookings for weeks and weeks and weeks, because it's just a simple marketing sort of target analysis. And, having an MBA background, I must admit to bringing some of that into my tarot as well. So it sounds a little bit cold when you express it that way, but, nonetheless, if you are a professional working in any field, then some, business savvy would indicate, well, you need to go where the market is.
And this might be kind of a sad question, but these are the times we live in. But do you know anybody who's ever been sued for divination? I'd be surprised if it hasn't happened.
I can't speak for the whole of America. I know you're based in Chicago, and we have currently a new site called fortunetellinglaws.com. That's all one word, fortunetellinglaws.com, where we are collating all of the state-by-state, town-by-town ordinances across the entirety of the vast United States. In England, it's a lot easier because we are now under one European law called the Consumer Protection Rights legislation. To answer the question, there have only been 8 people in the last 50 years in this country taken to court for fraudulent reading. But that wasn't tarot, and in all cases, it was fraud. The sort of scam where someone has died and people go to their home and say, I'm a psychic, can I help? Oh, he says that you must leave your money to charity. And then 2 days later, a charity arrives at the door collecting money. And of course, they're all in cahoots, and it's just outright fraud. Basically, there have only ever been 8 cases of that in the UK in the last 50 years. We are now covered by a General Trading Act, which says as long as you state clearly what it is that you intend to do, the person is in the right frame to understand that, and you deliver that service, then you have a contract, and that's it. So it wouldn't matter if I was selling you a motorbike or channeling Zathras from the planet Zog in order to advise you of your investments. As long as you're clear that I am claiming to channel Zathras, he is from the planet Zog, and he can advise you, and you agree to that, you pay me the agreed fee, and you then have no grounds to sue. So our advice to people is obviously just to make it clear what service you are offering, and ensure the person understands that, and then deliver that service. In this country, a bit like the US, in some states in the US, there is actually written into the ordinance, which usually covers fortune telling and tarot within it, that you should only offer it for entertainment purposes only. But for some reason in this country, it was always seen as some sort of get-out clause that you could avoid any risk of legal action by having for entertainment purposes only. Now, not only is that somewhat, in my view, degrading to the art and science that we practice, it's not necessary. It never has been under any law in this country. It's one of those urban myths. And even worse, as a lawyer actually pointed out to us recently when we were devising our guidance for people, here's the weird thing. If I say for entertainment purposes only as some sort of get-out clause, I could give you the most profound reading you've ever had. I could see into your entire life and offer you the advice you seek. Months later, it would turn out to be entirely true, valid, useful, and life-changing. And then you could sue me. The reason is because you could claim it wasn't entertaining. And I have only made one written, legal, binding contract with you, that this reading is, quote, for entertainment purposes only. So anything that isn't entertaining is outside our contract, and therefore, if you paid for that, you could either demand your money back or sue me.
Wow, that is a strange world, especially when you think about there's probably more superstition in oil futures and commodities than there is in the tarot.
I worked on a multi-currency, multinational banking system for a good 6 months out in Switzerland, and they were basically doing far more predictive sciences than any number of tarot readers. Although there is a somewhat technical difference between prediction and divination, but now's not the time to go into that.
In our chat, you also mentioned you were a fan of Philip K. Dick. What is your view of him, and how has he affected your life, Marcus?
Well, Philip K. Dick, to me, I have an entire collection of his work. I actually have his collected letters is signed. I managed to acquire a signed edition of that at some point. Because I just wanted a connection with him, I guess, because to me, there are two very influential pieces by Philip K. Dick that have profoundly affected me when I was younger, and still to this day. One is How to Build a Universe That Doesn't Fall Apart 2 Days Later. That essay introduced me to the idea of the Neoplatonic idea that the world and time is a moving likeness of itself. I think Philip K. Dick is one of the only people who can run a metaphor. For example, he was talking about supposing you snuck into Disneyland and started to replace the fake mechanical birds with real birds, and slowly over time started to replace all of the fake with the real, which would in fact be a forgery. And then immediately jump from that sort of metaphor straight into Neoplatonic thinking. And so I think my introduction into that realm came from Philip K. Dick. And then one of my esoteric teachers introduced me to the short story, I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon. And to me, that is the most profound story of the human condition that I have ever read. And for me, it arrived just at the right time, and I put that short story down. It took about half an hour to read, and I looked around the world. I looked around the room. I can remember, in fact, I still have the book. It's right in front of me. The Galan's edition is a nice bright yellow book with a big blue title. And I remember putting it down on the floor, looking around the room, and almost seeing through everything. And I felt that nothing had ever done that to me before. It was a truly initiatory parable. And the last line, the line that says, they're talking about a poster which is torn, and the figure in the story says, "We should have framed it," he said. "We didn't have sense enough to take care of it. Now it's torn, and the artist is dead." To me, that is one of the most profound and saddest things that I'd ever read, and still to this day, I look around the world and say, we should have taken more care of it. It's torn, and now the artist is dead.
Wow.
And when I look at tarot cards, I see the art and the artist maybe isn't quite dead, and maybe we can put it back together again.
Oh, that's very profound, indeed. But Marcus, your next book with Salamander and Sons is a comprehensive account of the Western esoteric initiatory system. You review these teachings of occult groups in the last century. Could you expand a little bit on it? Tell us what's it going to be about?
Yeah, certainly. It's a book I've been waiting 30 years to write, I think. I'm going to try and make sense of my own experience in the Western esoteric initiatory orders over the last 30 years. I've been lucky enough, I was the first student to gain an MA at the University of Exeter in Western esotericism in their reasonably new program in that subject. There's only two other places that do it, the Sorbonne and Amsterdam. And Exeter have a very good group of scholars and professors working on the Western esoteric tradition. Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be working on the MA and gain my MA from the University of Exeter, where there's a very good group of scholars, academics and professors working on Western esotericism as an academic study. And during that time, for my thesis, I wrote a paper on the curriculum of the Western esoteric system. And that is my deepest study. That is my deepest love. As a teacher and a trainer, I'm very interested in curricular studies. And so teaching occultism to people, I run an apprenticeship scheme where I take people on for a year and I guide them through the core components of the esoteric system. To me, that's the most fascinating thing, is how do you teach the unteachable? How do you trick people into encountering the divine in their life, no matter what their background, what their expectations, and what obstacles that they might put in their own way? And to me, that's something that I want to write about, and will be the entire subject of the Western Esoteric Initiatory System book. It's going to draw on my, even though I left my PhD program quite recently, I've got 4 years worth of studies that I want to publish in the book and make more accessible than some dry academic paper that might be lodged on a shelf somewhere. I really want to share the practice of the tradition as a living, contemporary, and most importantly, Western approach to spirituality. And I see tarot having a place as the language and the map of that system. And, the Western Esoteric Initiatory System book will pick up on that point and use tarot as part of the language to explain the system itself.
And that certainly sounds like quite an opus, and we definitely look forward to this. But I think that's all the time we have today, Marcus. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and giving us a very erudite and comprehensive view on the Tarot.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
We hope to have you back on, and good luck with Tarosophy.
Thank you very much.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Marcus Katz on an appetizer on his Alpha and Omega new book on the Tarot, Tarosophy. Again, for more information on Marcus and his ventures, please visit tarotprofessionals.com and check out his other books that include The Zodiacal Rules, Tarot Flip or Tarot Flip, and Alchemy Course. And Marcus certainly would like to stress that you check out his even newer book, After the Angel, hot off Hell's presses. And you can find it at tarotprofessionals.com/angel. Hopefully we can have Marcus back at Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio to discuss this book based on a long ceremonial ritual from the 14th century that takes 6 months and can allegedly summon certain angels and demons. And again, regardless of where you are in the Tarot, Tarosophy should be on your bookshelf or in your Kindle or bathroom reading basket. And that's really all I have, my beloved truth seekers, except again to thank you for joining this boot camp and boot up your arse venture called Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Almost 5 years now, and I'm amazed I've been allowed to last this long by either the powers of darkness or the powers of light. I've paid a mighty price, but I'm sure all of you have who have taken the battlefield of the Truth Seeker Warrior. As Clark Emery once said, the awakening of an individual is a cosmic event, and the universe and its black hole suns just don't plain like it. I hope I have armed you well, for you have armed me so well with the pearls of wisdom many of you grant me in between our incarnations here at the virtual Alexandria. Divided we stand, but together we rise. We, the few, the proud, the heretical. Like the Gospel of Thomas number 73 says, the harvest is large, but the workers are few. And together we travel on the seas of fate, in between the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy, all the way to the farthest shores of imagination. We, Johnny Cash Bodhisattvas and existentialist Galahads. And we will never give up, or stop, or sell out. Maybe give a day or two. So let me leave you with a poem by the very Gnostic, or perhaps more Marcionite-minded Herman Melville, called Fragments of a Lost Gnostic Poem of the 12th Century. Found a family, build a state. The pledge event is still the same. Matter and end will never abate his ancient brutal claim. Indolence is heaven's ally here, and energy the child of hell. The good man pouring from his pitcher clear, but brims the poison well. Lastly, as always, keep writing your own gospel and living your own myth, or else the demiurge will hire a heavenly ghostwriter and fate body double to do that for you. And you will not like the plot, and you will not like the ending, my beloved truth seekers. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. The road is ended, the song is over, thought I'd have something more to say. But don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved truth seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.
How you coming on that novel you're working on? Huh? Got a big stack of papers there? Got a nice little story you're working on there? A big novel you've been working on for 3 years? Huh? Got a compelling protagonist? Yeah? Got a obstacle for him to overcome? Huh? Little story brewing there? Working on that for quite some time, huh? Yeah, talking about that 3 years ago. Yeah, been working on that the whole time. Nice little narrative, beginning, middle, and end. Some friends become enemies, some enemies become friends. Yeah, At the end, your main character is richer for the experience? Yeah? Yeah, you got to... No, you deserve some time off. Oh, I know it hurts now, Brian, but look at the bright side. You have some new material for that novel you've been writing. You know, the novel you've been working on. You know, the one you've been working on for 3 years. You know, the novel. Got something new to write about now, you know. Maybe your main character gets into a relationship, suffers a little heartbreak. Something like what you've just been through. Draw from a real life experience. Little heartbreak, you know. Work it into the story. Make those characters a little more three-dimensional.